Welcome, listeners. I'm your humble host, Joe Williams. Thoughts on business topics of some importance. You're listening to The Ragcast. What Boléro can teach us about a company's life cycle. I'm deeply intrigued by Maurice Ravel's masterpiece composition, Boléro. If you're unfamiliar with this composition, it is essentially a melody that repeats over and over again. It starts with just a light drumming of the snare drum and the flute, and upon each repetition, it adds additional instruments to the melody in a hypnotic, repeated pattern. Each time it repeats, more instruments play the melody, and it keeps building on each other until the end of the composition, when it quickly disassembles, crashes, and ends. Boléro teaches us that there is such thing as an end. There is no such thing as being big enough to overcome that think too big to fail. You may have begun with a single formula of business success, then repeat that formula, and you keep expanding to sales growth, different markets, and ever-growing workforce. Things are good, and the future is bright. And then, poof. In nature, there are two paths of growth. One is called determinate growth, and the other is indeterminate growth. In determinate growth, think of mammals, such as ourselves. We grow very rapidly from birth to adulthood, but we stop growing after that. Why don't we keep growing and turn into giants? Because if we never stop growing, the physics stop working to make us even functional. The structure and material of bones would reach a point that it couldn't support the weight and the gravity drag of mass pulling on it. Even the blue whale, the largest animal on the planet, stops growing. I read that if it kept growing, it would soon reach a point that it couldn't even open its own mouth to feed. But indeterminate growth is sometimes thrown around as growth that continues on, but happens at a very slow pace. And even then, it isn't infinite, as organisms eventually die. Think your hair. Your hair will keep growing longer and longer, but it does reach a point that it will grow so slowly that its growth isn't even noticeable and barely measurable. A tree will only grow to a certain height, but the trunk will keep on growing thicker and thicker until its death. But it will never grow taller or wider, just internally thicker. Back to Boléro. The composition is an example of life at determinate speed and growth. But you can only repeat that pattern to the point that you run out of instruments to add to the composition, so the end has to come. A company is the same way as any organism on the planet. But every quarter and year, they look for that growth. They have a pattern, the business model, that is helping them with their growth, and they stick with that pattern because it is all that they know. It is cooked into their DNA, and they march on, not knowing of their own fate and determinate growth world that they belong to. Companies can outlast people's careers and even lifetimes, but they cannot outlast their own fate. So if you are in the first part as first flute, a young startup, or in the middle, like a mature company, the finale is only 5 bars, so it will happen very quickly, and you will know you are there when the pattern changes and becomes chaotic in a very short period of time. It's okay. There needs to be a finale.